The articulator we're going to be using is a Hanau articulator model 183. It's called a wide view model of an articulator, and the reason why is it is constructed in such a way that these posterior stanchions or verticals are spread far apart, and that allows us, as we're arranging teeth, to be able to see the linguals of the teeth quite well. The parts of the articulator we're primarily concerned with at this point are the condyles, the little pin that you'll find on the distal part of this vertical member, a mounting plate, an infraorbital pointer device, the mounting pin, and the incisal guide table. Before mounting a case, you want to make sure that the mounting pin is on the 0 mark. And in this particular model, it has a stop on it, and when the articulator is closed all the way till it hits that stop, it is on the 0 mark. In order to assemble the face bow transfer and the maxillary arch to the articulator, what we do with it is that we spread the spring bow apart and place the earpieces, there's a little hole in the earpieces that goes on that little pin on the vertical member of the articulator. Put a pin on either side, and it automatically springs to the correct position. At this point, however, we do not have the vertical position of it because our anterior reference point, this is the gadget on the articulator that allows us to align the anterior reference point to get the correct vertical height to it. And the way we do that, if we're mounting it strictly with the face bow itself, such as what we're doing here, is there's a little vertical holding device that we can place on the lower part of the rim here, and we can raise or lower this vertical holding device by unscrewing that little knob, and raise or lower it, and we want to raise it vertically till the infraorbital pin touches, the infraorbital pointer touches that little guide that we have on the articulator. Once we have that at the correct position, then this can be tightened down, and that should hold it vertically till this infraorbital pointer is just touching this guide that we have on the articulator. Then that can be swung out of the way, and now we can assemble the maxillary cast and its base plate and occlusion rim onto the articulator, and that's ready for plastering in place, and that'll give us the correct position of the maxillary cast as it is in relation to the patient, and with that same relationship transferred to the articulator. The preferred way of using the face bow and attaching it to the getting the maxillary cast attached to the articulator is by the use of a device called a mounting platform. This mounting platform allows you to keep your face bow in your office by simply disassembling the spring bow itself from the rest of the apparatus. So we just loosen that upper screw and remove the face bow itself, and now this can be assembled onto the mounting plate and tighten the screw that we have in the front of the mounting plate. That automatically puts this in the correct position, puts the bite fork in the correct position, and we have a cast support that we can unloosen and raise that cast support against the bottom of the bite fork now, tighten that in place. That will allow us to mount it without this giving way in any way. It will support it so it does not tend to shrink. Then this mounting platform is placed onto the articulator, and the knurl knob on the base of it is just tightened down, and now what we have is this bite fork with the occlusion rim assembled on it now, with assembling on it, is in the same position that it would have been had we assembled the bite fork to it like we did before. This enables you to ship to your laboratory technician your master cast, base plate and occlusion rim, and your facebow assembly, and if your laboratory technician has a Hanau 183 type of articulator and a mounting platform, you do not have to ship your facebow to the laboratory to have the technician mount the case for you. It can be done strictly with the mounting platform. Now we've plastered the master cast to the articulator by means of some mounting plaster, which is a quick set plaster that we use, and we usually do that by means of placing a core of mounting plaster on the inside to attach the cast to the articulator. Now what I'll do is I will disassemble this, and I will put an outer layer in the areas where you see that it is void. I'll put an outer layer of plaster on that and smooth that out till it's real nice and neat so it's very presentable to the patient. As you can see, we've now added an outer layer of plaster onto our mounting, and with that we can smooth that outer layer of plaster and make it look real nice and neat so it's presentable to our patient. We've now removed the mounting platform from the articulator and placed back in its place a mounting ring. And now, after putting a little Vaseline on the base of the cast like we did on the maxillary cast, we assembled the centric relation record and make sure that it's sitting on there solid. The centric relation records assemble the two occlusion rims and the cast with the record in between them. And now we can close the articulator and we can make a mix of plaster and do a core for the lower just like we did on the maxillary out of mounting plaster. Now, as you can see, we have mounted the mandibular cast to the articulator by means of a core of mounting plaster, and at this point we want to dress this up by adding the more mounting plaster out to the outside of this core to make it nice and neat like we did on the maxillary arch. Now we've dressed up the mandibular mounting by placing a layer of mounting plaster on the mandibular arch and smoothing it out so that it is nice and presentable for the patient. The next procedure we wish to do is called a protrusive registration. A protrusive registration is made as an eccentric registration of the relationship of the mandible to the maxilla, and by making this eccentric relationship we can adjust the condyles on the articulator to simulate the condylar slope on the patient. So what we do is we apply compound to the mandibular rim much as we did when making a centric relation record, only this time I would like a little more compound on it than I do for a centric relation record. But we're not going to have her close quite all the way. She'll be open just a little bit. And we're going to make this record with her jaw sliding forward, oh, perhaps as much as a centimeter. So we apply the compound like we did for making a centric relation record, only we want a little excess. And remember, the length of this compound in making any record should be quite long. Make it as long anterior-posteriorly as you can. Now what we need to do is take a wet finger and mold the compound up into a ridge so that it is much higher than the occlusal plane, and we do that on both sides. Mold it up into a ridge. Once we have it molded into a ridge, we're going to superheat the material so we'll soften it very, very well. And once the material is superheated, we're going to temper it in the water bath. Now we go to the patient's mouth with the maxillary already seated in the mouth, and we seat it, and this time I want you to slide your jaw way forward and just close gently until I tell you to stop, keeping the jaw forward. Right there, that's great. Now open. After making a protrusive registration, we seat the base plates and occlusion rims back onto the master cast. And since these master casts were mounted in centric relation, and this record is made with the mandible protruded by 8 to 9 millimeters, then this record does not match the maxillary occlusion rim. And as we can see, the condyle on the articulator is in an arbitrary position that is sort of freewheeling at this point. Now if we move the mandible on this case, move it forward to the point that the registration fits accurately into the maxillary rim and the grooves that were created in the maxillary rim, we see that this condyle moved up to a position of approximately 40 degrees, which means that basically in the patient the condylar slope is about 40 degrees from the occlusal plane. As we can see, when the record is seated on the opposite side, on the patient's left side, and is seated properly, it gave us a condylar inclination on the left side of approximately 35 degrees. Once that is seated and we know the inclinations that this should be, we can tighten it down like this, and then that condyle cannot move within its housing. It remains at the angle of which the record gave it to us. In order to set the lateral component of the condylar element, a formula was developed that if you plug the numbers into the formula that we found from the horizontal setting, and this number on this particular side, as we can see, is about 35. If we plug that number into the formula is L equals H over 8 plus 12. So if we have 35 as the horizontal, we divide that by 8, that would give us 4 3/8. Plus 12 would make the number that the lateral setting would be 16 3/8. In order to set that lateral setting, we loosen the knurl knob on the top. Then we rotate the condylar element until it is about slightly above the 15 mark, which would be right there. And then tighten the condylar, tighten that knob back down once again. When we go to the right side, since the horizontal setting is approximately 40, if we plug that into the formula, L equals H, which is 40, over 8 would be 5, plus 12 would make 17, and so our lateral setting on the articulator would be 17.